Judge Dredd, originally published on the Countercurrents website, July 7th, 2011, reprinted in Pulp Fascism. Judge Dredd is the publishing phenomenon of British comics for the last 30 years, if not more. Nearly all of the strips have been written by John Wagner under his own name and a variety of aliases, while a great number of artists have worked on the sequences. For this lantern-jawed judge, part policeman, part vigilante, part judge, part jury, contains almost ludicrously denied fascistic undercurrents, which only pedants bother to deny. Dredd's personality and physiology never alters. He is the same from the first strip to the last, and the fact that he never develops but always remains unchanging is part of the character's esprit. The graphic novel is a satire which can be read straight, and hence we detect its dangers for liberal orthodoxy. This has been commented on many times, that somehow read as black farce, a fascist comic, no matter how unintentionally, has enjoyed massive sales and influence in non-compliance with politically correct norms. Essentially, the judges are the last defense against complete chaos and irretrievable social breakdown. They are the morally efficacious governing elite which runs Megacity 1, an enormous version of New York which sprawls across North America and contains tens of millions of citizens. The city is virtually a state, or city-state, in its own right. The judges are police, jury, judge, and executioner all rolled into one. Each judge spends 10, 12, or 14 years in training. They never retire, except to teach law in the staff college or to go into mutant land, badlands full of radiation which exists beyond the city's precincts. There they go to bring law to the lawless. This leads to quite hilarious breakdowns in liberal jurisprudence, such as when Dredd says to a trembling malcontent under his boot, "Obey me! Obey the law!" All of the judges fly helicopter gunships and use super-powered bikes. They are also heavily armoured and carry every type of weaponry. They are ready to die and give their lives for the city. They are a Praetorian Guard, if you will. A supreme or chief judge is elected by the others to lead the judges, and psychic phenomena are terribly real. They are part of routine life, hence a deputation of psi judges who are in position to deal with them. At best, this comic strip obeys a type of ultra-conservatism that stretches PC norms but just about remains within them. There are occasional homilies about inclusion, but these tend to relate to persons mutated by radiation rather than the usual PC constituencies. There is a relative absence of liberal lecturing, presumably because the form is considered too low and populous to really be worth bothering with. Obviously, the bulk of the readership consists of adolescent boys of all ages. One imagines that this runs the gamut from 12 to 40 years of age. Action is the key word here, and one is reminded of Raymond Chandler's dictum about pulp fiction, namely, when one is in doubt about a plot, just have an armed man enter the room. Judge Dredd is very much along these lines. A vast variety of plots have occurred over the years, but in order to give a flavour of them, I have decided to concentrate on one extended story which is a quarter of a century old. The story in question was known as The Executioner, and was based on a speed view of a forgettable VHS video from the 80s called The Exterminator. The story was 26 pages in length and featured a beautiful female vigilante called Blanche Tatum, who sets out to revenge her husband's death. He was driven to suicide by threats from a criminal gang who offered him a loan under loan shark terms. The story pivots around the fact that she was a rookie judge, later expelled from college for dating her future husband. Her skills as a judge are put into good effect in assassinating a range of criminal lowlifes. They tend to meet a fate which is appropriate to their criminal career or demeanor. Judge Dredd gradually gets closer and closer to the perpetrator, perp in Judge's slang. The woman is presented in glamorous, if understated terms. She is a thin, blonde, blue-eyed who wears facial jewelry, blue lipstick, and an Alice band that sweeps her hair back over her forehead. In her guise as the executioner, she wears a black ninja suit plus a hooded mask. Her signature, or calling card, is a small handbill with "Justice is done" printed upon it. The real twist in the story isn't the action or the violence, but rather the coincidence between the proto-judge as a vigilante and the fact that under liberal jurisprudence the judges are virtually vengeance-mongers themselves. It is this tension between the pseudo-judge and the real judges which makes the story work, or adds depth to it at any rate. The story of Blanche Tatum helps to expose part of the reality of judgeship. In the end, just like a male Western hero, Blanche sends the children to the grandparents and goes looking for the final loan shark perpetrators to take out with her violent handbills. Having done so, she dies in the end at the hands of Judge Dredd, but only because her weapon had no ammunition left. This judge, who reveals the reality of judgeship, has no aptitude for taking on her own former colleagues. Interestingly, opinion polls in Megacity 1 reveal a 95% approval rating for the vigilante. Only 1% is against, including Judge Dredd. In his pithy remark, "Justice it may be, legal it ain't." It probably applies to the Judge Dredd brand as a whole. A rather short one today, as I'm quite busy, but it's about a topic that Jonathan Bowden goes into quite often, which is the nature of Judge Dredd and 2000 AD. Jonathan Bowden is obviously quite familiar with Judge Dredd and makes reference to Judge Dredd in The Nature of the Heroic and Leon Degrelle and Tintin, otherwise known as the Pulp Fascism speech, which is very interesting. What's interesting here, and Jonathan Bowden's remarked on this before, is that typically in media where you have some kind of right-wing existentialist or individualist figure like Dirty Harry or Charlie Bronson in Death Wish. I can barely remember. Charles Bronson just plays Charles Bronson in almost any movie he's in, even like Mr. Majestic or some of his other films. Charles Bronson just appears to play himself. I mean, he plays the character quite well, but they're all just Charles Bronson characters. But whereas, Clint Eastwood has probably a bigger range. Anyway, so you have these characters, and they're criticized by the mass media and the general public as being, evil fascists who do what they want, especially Dirty Harry because he's a policeman. So to counteract this, they have another installment in the franchise where the right-wing individualist must go up against a right-wing authoritarian, a force even more right-wing, a force even more fascistic, more authoritarian, more illiberal, more Nietzschean, imposing their will upon others, typically within some kind of authoritarian framework. Dirty Harry Magnum Force, the most interesting one, or the most well-known one rather. Within the police force, there are a group of people who idolize Dirty Harry and then form their own death squad, or like a right-wing death squad. And I believe it's actually called that in the film, or it's implied to be that when they talk about, death squad and the police, like what they had way back in Brazil. it's like, oh, fascism is evil and it's come from abroad. This is an evil foreign force that has afflicted our poor American boys, and only Dirty Harry and his 44 Magnum revolver can sort it out. Whereas here, Judge Dredd is the right-wing authoritarian, and truthfully, the Exterminator character represents the right-wing individualist. What's very interesting is online in the 2000 AD circles, which I must admit, not very familiar with. I've never read that much Judge Dredd. I have seen both the movies, the Carl Urban one and the Sylvester Stallone one. But here, many people say, oh, the Exterminator is one of the best Judge Dredd stories from that era. And so you have this figure, the Exterminator, Blanche Tatum. She represents a right-wing individualist going up against the system to get her justice. She's carrying out vendetta. And Judge Dredd here represents the omnipresent authoritarian force that she is simultaneously struggling against, because these so-called judges have betrayed her. They've betrayed her, and they led to her partner, her husband, being murdered, brutally murdered by criminals and gangsters. So she does what she believes the judges ought to do, because she was once trained to be a judge, so she knows their code, she knows their laws, she knows how they fight, she knows what to do. But ultimately, because she has transgressed the law, she must also be put down, just like the criminals that she has executed. And then the interesting thing here is, of course, the satire, of this is at the end, when Jonathan Bowden reveals there was a 95% popularity poll where Blanche Tatum and the vigilante actions were considered a great benefit to the people of Mega City 1. So that reveals, the sort of mass media appeal of characters like Dirty Harry, of these vigilantes that go up against the system and sometimes die doing what they believe in. It only appears to martyr them for their beliefs against the system and against the corruption that it supposedly empowers. Of course, this isn't true for Judge Dredd, which is why, he exterminates and he enforces the law with extreme prejudice. All people who go against him, who go against his sort of force of nature. Judge Dredd, and as Bowden alludes to in the article and in the speech, Judge Dredd is unchanging. He's omnipotent. He's extremely powerful, and he will always, by the end of the story, enforce the law. No matter what happens in either of the stories. I mean, there's some development in the Carl Urban movie. It's not really the same as the classic 2000 AD comics, where Judge Dredd just does whatever he can to enforce the law and to achieve complete punishment for the ne'er-do-wells and the criminals that have transgressed him and the legal system that he espouses. However, what is very interesting is Jonathan Bowden remarks on how Carlos Esquerra, the original artist for 2000 AD, was rather rendered Blanche as, this very attractive woman, sort of very, not a very mature woman, but kind of, in the middle between youthful and mature beauty. And Carlos Esquerra was a very good artist. He was the original artist for 2000 AD until he died, and he was very good and very capable. And if you look up the art for this issue or volume of Judge Dredd, Blanche is in one of these, skin-tight, futuristic bodysuits, and that sort of thing doesn't really exist anymore today. The very interesting theme that goes on in Pulp Fascism is that Jonathan Bowden refers to how these low forms of art, the dime novels, the pulp, as he calls it, or as has been called, comic books, stuff really intended for the detritus of society, the plebeian, the proletariat, just the people at the bottom, and also sort of niche consumers who no one really cares about, like geeks and Poindexters. That sort of stuff's completely changed now. I mean, 2000 AD and Judge Dredd was, a favourite of children in Britain for a very long time, and not just in Britain, but children across the world. But I doubt you could really get away with a children or a young adult comic today with a character like Blanche, or even 2000 AD. I think 2000 AD sticks around because it's been grandfathered in. But if you take a look at comics and young adult and children's media today, it's extremely sanitized, especially when compared to the Far East manga. And what's also interesting is how movies have completely transformed the comic book as a medium. I don't know if Jonathan Bowden saw the writing on the wall when it came to comics, especially Marvel and DC. He obviously never really engaged with the true cape shit of Marvel, Avengers, a billion movies about a billion characters. Oh, here's Doctor Strange, here's the new Spider-Man with Tom Holland, here's Spider-Man's sidekick movie, here's comic movie number 5, number 6, and it all ties in together into this one big, massive arc of commercialized slop and disappointment. I don't really like saying slop, but there's no other better word for it. Cape shit, slop, it all kind of refers to this nonsensical travesty. What's very interesting is this really goes against Jonathan Bowden's idea that these mediums, because of their lowbrow nature, they can avoid censorship, when the truth is what's happened is, because they attracted the lowbrow people became the writers and the authors and the artists, and they have transformed the medium, and also capital has completely transformed the medium of comics. These days, the comic books are an afterthought. They're like, oh, I saw the movies, I gotta watch the comics. Whereas before, the movie was like a tribute to the fans. Thanks to you guys, you've bought so many comics, we're going to make a movie, and it's going to be a bit of a B movie. It's like the unreleased Captain America movie is this kind of schlocky 90s action movie that has more in common with like Power Rangers than it does with the Captain America movies of today. Or the one that started it all, Iron Man. I think that came out in 2008. I wonder if Jonathan Bowden ever saw that and recognized the end is nigh for comics as pseudo-fascistic pieces of media with which other people can engage. The comic book as a medium for fascism is probably the synopsis of someone's university thesis somewhere. But this Captain America movie was unreleased. You can read about it. I've never seen it, but you can see the costumes and the photos online. It looks like Power Rangers. It's very clearly kind of like an ode to the fans. It's like, we've got all your favorite characters, and we'll combine all the fan favorite moments and arcs and villains and have it all together in a mishmash. Whereas now, the Marvel movie and even the DC movie, some of the DC movies are so bad. I would say this, I think many Jonathan Bowden fans were comic fans or are fans of comics or have engaged with comics. I used to be a massive fan of The Punisher, and I do find it interesting. Jonathan Bowden, I don't think he ever talks about The Punisher, or if he does, probably in an article somewhere. I don't think in any of the speeches he makes reference to The Punisher. The Punisher's a very interesting figure, because he's this sort of extreme right-wing figure who kind of reduces the superhero. The Punisher is a deconstruction of the superhero. You take Superman, he's got powers, he's got laser eyes, but what would he do if he had to fight against, a Mexican cartel that cuts people's heads off with chainsaws? What good are laser eyes against that if you're a pacifist? Whereas, some people say, Batman doesn't have any powers, but Batman is a genius, he's a billionaire, he is at the peak of his physicality. Whereas the Punisher is just a guy. He's just like a worn-out American military veteran from the Vietnam War with nothing left to lose and access to machine guns. That's it. That's his superpower. It's the complete deconstruction, the complete reduction of superheroes. Superheroes impose their will upon the criminals and the supervillains of their societies. Well, the Punisher imposes his will in the same vein as Judge Dredd with a machine gun. So I do find it very interesting. There aren't many references to The Punisher by Jonathan Bowden. I don't think there are any. But if I come across one, if someone in the audience knows that there's a speech or an article where Jonathan Bowden talks about The Punisher, I'd be very interested in that. Because The Punisher, it's like, what if Superman fought against the cartels or the Italian mafia or child traffickers or triads, that cut people up and feed them to pigs? What good is laser eyes and X-ray vision if you're up against an organized criminal empire that traffics children, sells addicting drugs, and does all sorts of awful, terrible things to innocent people? I think what's also interesting, I don't think Jonathan Bowden touches on it a lot, but he hints at it a few times. That's sort of the respect that older material used to have for children and young adults. 2000 AD was intended for young adults. And there are various things that have been sort of neutered as things have gone along. The art of Carlos Esquerra probably would have been completely changed if 2000 AD started today, or it would have been classified as, adult only. But one thing that's very interesting to me is, John Bowden talk about things like Watership Down, but for those of you who are British in the audience, you probably have seen or heard of Watership Down as the most traumatizing child movie or, kids movie ever released. It's this animated movie about these rabbits, and at one point they do battle with a sort of, pseudo-fascistic rabbit society. It's a lot more fascistic in the books. The Watership Down books are very interesting. I really wish Jonathan Bowden said something about them, because I think his analysis of, these sort of perennial rabbits that have visions of fate and destiny, these pagan rabbits existing within, idyllic Christian English countryside. It's very interesting. And you have the sort of this powerful fascistic warlord rabbit, General Woundwort. How does a rabbit have a general? But he kills various different rabbits, and various rabbits within the books are savaged, and in the movie are savaged to death by dogs and cats and farmers with guns. And, these are beloved children's characters who are mercilessly killed by horrifying things. Honestly, the scene of the dog in Watership Down is genuinely horrifying, but it's enjoyable. Children like being scared. Young adults like being scared. Teenagers love horror. Every teenager has a story about, begging their parents to let them watch Friday the 13th or a similar scary movie because it's fascinating. And especially when you grow up in a world like today where every corner is rounded and everything has a soft edge, you desire something scary, something that puts you out of your comfort zone. And that's gone today in children's media. In fact, there was a book series I read as a child that got an adaptation. You might have heard of it. It's Red Wars, about these anthropomorphic mice who live in an abbey. And in the first book, they kind of believe in Mouse Jesus. And then in the later books, it's like, oh, well, we live in an abbey and we're monks and we have an abbot, but we don't actually believe in God or anything. All the Christianity is removed from the series. But in the very first book, it's quite violent. There's a scene where there's these rats. So these mice, they live in this abbey and they live a peaceful, idyllic life. And then this army of rats, of rampaging, rapacious rats arrive. And they're like, oh, we're going to eat you. We're going to cook you. We're going to use you as slaves until you die. And then we're going to eat you. And they besiege the abbey. And they surround the abbey. And there was a TV show made after the book came out. And in the TV show, the mice have wooden sticks, and they use all sorts of trickery to knock out and befuddle the rats and to stop them at their course. But in the book, the mice have swords and arrows, and they pour boiling oil upon the rats. They kill them. And in fact, there's quite a graphic scene where the rats are sneaking about, and there's these two rats who are the left hand and the right hand men, or rats rather. The right-hand rodent for the chief of the rats, Clooney the Scourge. And they come up with this plan, and one of the rats does the plan far better than the other rat. And then whilst they're retreating from being attacked by the mice, one of the rats pushes the far better performing rat, the more intelligent rat. He pushes him out of the tree, and he falls down to the ground, and he breaks all his bones in his body. And as the rats are retreating, he comes up to him, and he's telling the other guys, oh, don't worry, I'll save him, I'll bring him back to the encampment. You guys go on ahead without me. Make sure you escape from the arrows and the tar and the pitch and the boiling oil and the swords and the daggers. I'll save this one. Don't worry. And he comes up to him and he's like, well, this is just how things are going to be, because it's quite a cold, brutal scene where he's like, look, you got in the way of my ambition, so I have to kill you. And he just chokes him to death. This guy's broken body. This rat's broken body on the floor of the forest. He chokes him to death with his claws, with his bare claws. He chokes him, he strangles the life out of him, he throttles him to death. In a kid's book, obviously the scene didn't make it into the kids' TV adaptation. But I remember, I watched the adaptation as a child, and I was like, oh, mummy, can I have the books? And then we went and got the books. And the books are far more graphic, they're far more violent. And I loved them. They were fascinating. I quickly gave up on the TV show, and I was like, oh, I want all of the books, because they're much more fun. And these days, that kind of stuff is gone now. You'd probably get in trouble if you tried to sell that to children. Of course, it's been grandfathered in, and lots of the stuff has been grandfathered in. But even, you can compare, like, what came out later. Avatar, The Legend of Aang. I don't know if any of you guys watched it. That was also a big thing when I was growing up, when I was a teenager. It came out, I think, when I was 12 or 13. And it's got some violence, and there's, this threat of world conquest, and people do die, but they don't die in the same way. It's nothing like Watership Down. It's nothing like, Captain Scarlet. I think there is a speech from Jonathan Bowden where he refers to how, violent Captain Scarlet is. With the first episode, or the opening of every episode, the first few seconds of every episode of Captain Scarlet, he shoots someone. He kills someone with a gun, and sometimes it's not even, a villain. You have the Mysterons, these aliens that come to Earth, but the person Captain Scarlet shoots at the beginning of the episode is just a random assailant, just someone who's decided to kill Captain Scarlet, so therefore Captain Scarlet must kill him. I think it's very interesting that the lowbrow, kids stuff meant for children, for teenagers, for nerds, for geeks, for outsiders, the lowbrow has been infected. It has become self-censoring. That's what's happened, really. There's less of an influence of censorship these days from the actual board of censors. The BBFC, the British Board of Film Classification, or the American, in Europe you have PEGI, PEGI. There are various different organizations, that censor movies and film and give them age ratings and classifications. These days, creators self-censor, and the biggest censorship of all is money. On YouTube, you get demonetized. They do stuff to your video if you swear, if you're aggressive, if you talk about violent, nasty things. They can take your video down. They can strike you down. It's quite, it's interesting. They're called strikes. You get a strike on your video. Ooh, I've been struck by YouTube. YouTube and the corporate sponsorship have gone against me. Anyway, I've gone on for far too long here. I've gone on for twice the length of the article, but I clearly have very strong feelings about comics, especially about The Punisher, and I find Jonathan Bowden's appreciation for lowbrow art very fascinating. I really do wonder what he would have said about the fact that manga from the East has completely superseded the comic. If you're a geek, if you're a nerd today, you barely go anywhere near Superman. You go towards manga. And what's very interesting is today there is this strong liberal dislike for the law, dislike for law and order. Enforcing the law, being a policeman, makes you a fascist in the eyes of the general public. The general public has such a strong distrust for police and authority figures now, especially in media. And you have all these random bullshit artists on the internet, on Twitter, on wherever. Official, professional artists, people who've been drawing for ages, people who draw the official issues of Batman and Superman. They're drawing Batman and Superman attacking ICE, attacking immigration officials. During BLM, they were drawing police officers getting beaten up by Batman. And the idea is, well, they're all evil, they're all corrupt, it's a corrupt system, so therefore it's against, the moral fiber. But then you go into even characters like the Punisher, these strong anti-heroes. There's that Punisher movie, Warzone, where he thinks about killing himself because he hurts an undercover cop. And throughout the comics, the Punisher's like, oh, I kill people, but I don't kill cops. He's against the police. He always uses non-lethal weapons, stun grenades, physical attacks. He never actually kills a policeman. He tries his best not to hurt them. And whereas today, I saw an astounding artwork drawn by a fan artist of the Punisher shooting an ICE agent, which is so peculiar. It's so bizarre how, the people who draw these superheroes who are essentially doing what the police cannot do, but still following the ultimate same moral framework, drawing them attacking police officers. In the golden age, so the so-called golden age of comics, you probably would have had Superman and Batman deporting people if migration was such a pressing issue. They would have been on the side of the law. They would have, gone to the border. Superman would have flown people back. He would have grabbed the Mexicans by the scruff of their necks and dragged them across the river. And the same goes for Batman. And the Punisher would probably just have a machine gun, be like D-Day. He's broken the law, blah, blah, blah. But now it's Batman says, no human being is illegal. Well, what's the point in bars then, in a prison? Because that's a border, isn't it? That makes no sense. It boggles the mind. But yes, what's happened to comics and lowbrow media, it has become self-censoring, which of course is the nature of these things that appeal towards a common denominator, or the lowest common denominator, and they try to have mass market appeal. Not only, the fans eventually become the authors, especially with these series which are considered, public canon. Anyone can write Batman, anyone can draw Superman, anyone can create comics. They aren't the personal creations. I think that's the biggest difference between comics and manga. Is many manga, they might have a team of editors, but ultimately they have either a singular author who is both the writer and the artist, or a team of people, or maybe 3 or 4 people, and it's their singular collective work. Unless someone tragically dies, it's their property. It's, once they say it's done, it's done. It's very, they may at some point go, oh, well, I'll let you license a reboot or a reinterpretation, but my series is my series. Whereas comic book continuity, in some ways, following the official theories, Batman and Superman in the comics today are the direct inheritors, or the direct continuation of the original Batman and Superman stories and the Spiderman stories from before. Anyway, I think I've gone on for far too long now. I mean, I can talk about this for ages. Honestly, I could probably make an hour-long video about the Punisher alone as this sort of pseudo-fascistic but simultaneously anti-fascist figure that has been used and abused by various different authors throughout time. I'd be very curious to explore Jonathan Bowden's thoughts, or potentially what Jonathan Bowden would have thought about, series like The Boys, which are anti-superhero, but then through the power of capital, the Amazon have completely transmogrified The Boys. If you've ever read any of the original comics, it's completely different to the Amazon series. The Amazon series is this bizarre liberal reinterpretation of what was already quite a liberal comic. Garth Ennis hates superheroes. He considers superheroes to be the ultimate fascists, which is why he hates them. It's why he created The Boys. Homelander is this sort of fascistic reinterpretation of Superman. Superman is this alien. He's come to Earth. He's a post-nation state creature. He doesn't have any particular allegiance. Many times he's portrayed as loyal to America, but he's loyal to the idea of America and this sort of transcontinental America. America applies to the world. That's what Superman is. He sort of wants everywhere in the world to be the idealized form of America, and we're all one big America. You could say Superman is the face of globalism, whereas Homelander is clad in the stars and stripes. He's portrayed as this classic American figure. He's blonde and blue-eyed, playing on the sort of Aryan Ubermensch traits, and he's in some ways, I think, throughout the comics, is even portrayed as this sort of, Christian fundamentalist, which is very funny because he's a superhero and he flies about, can shoot lasers and kills people. But in the comics, he participates in like these Christian charities. It's early 2000s, atheist, skeptic, liberal, like, whoa, Bush is so evil, man. These Christians are so evil. These fundamentalist Christians, they want to kill all the gays in Iraq, blah, blah, blah. That kind of thinking is gone. It's been wiped out. This sort of Occupy 2008 movement, which was sort of the brainchild behind Garth Ennis' writing. I like Garth Ennis, honestly. I think his stuff's very fun. It's very funny. And I think, as a right-wing person myself, you have to be able to enjoy being mocked. And especially when it's done very well. So I quite like Garth Ennis. I don't recommend that you waste your time on cape shit, of course. But at the same time, exploring lowbrow mediums and seeing whether they encapsulate the heroic ideal is a fun thing to do. And if you're bedbound or sick or stuck at work and you can't be bothered to do your job, I often don't do my job at work. I think about things. I listen to Bowden speeches. At my last job, I used to listen to Bowden speeches non-stop just to get me through the day. But it's very interesting to compare, Superman, the Homelander, the Punisher, to, actual sort of fascistic ideals and stories like Conan the Barbarian, which is, is played seriously. Superheroes are ultimately this sort of like tongue-in-cheek pastiche of law enforcement, but, done in a nice way, until you get to things like The Boys, where it's very extreme. Superman is sort of the ultimate policeman. He's the sort of the policeman in your mind, because he can read minds, he can listen to heartbeats, he can tell when people are lying. from, across the planet. So that's all very interesting. Anyway, we've almost reached 40 minutes of me just nattering on. So I'm going to terminate the video there. Of course, like and subscribe. Shout out Jonathan Bowden quotes on YouTube. Lots to say today, honestly. And probably lots to say going forwards as we read more and as I engage more with Jonathan Bowden's writing. We're probably going to start talking about it more. But that's the objective of the Jonathan Bowden Learning College, is to take what Jonathan Bowden wrote and to explore it beyond the context of the time. So with that, thank you very much, and I bid you all adieu.